Today, let's talk about Miss Julia Speaks Her Mind by Anne B. Ross. Come on in, welcome to my home. Let's talk about this book, and before I get into it, one, spoilers, duh, and two, before we can really talk about how I feel about this book, we need to talk about the author and the world at that time, because how a critic thinks about a book is going to be representative of their life experience, and how an author writes a book is going to be representative of their life experience and what was going on in the world. So let's start. The book is written by Anne B. Ross. Anne was really interesting because she went to college with her kids. That's right, she was one of those people who decided to go to college with her kids, and so she got her bachelor's degree and her master's and PhD. Her bachelor's degree is from the University of North Carolina at Asheville. Master's and doctorate of philosophy degrees are from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She taught literature and humanities at the North Carolina at Asheville. Now, she comes to this after writing a couple books, and after writing 3 books. And what's interesting about that is the fact that you hear most people say that she comes to this after writing the books in the 90s. That's not exactly true. Her first book, The Murder Cure, was written in 1978. Her second book, The Murder Stroke, was written in 1981, and her third book, which was a hardcover, The Pilgrimage, came out in 1988. So there are a few years between her third book and then her next book, which of course is Miss Julia Speaks Her Mind. And that's going to be sort of important, because by then, Anne had become a teacher, she had become a professor, she had actually really moved into this whole thing, and the world was pretty different by then. One of the things Anne did say was that her characters were drawn from various things in her life, so that it wasn't modeled after one specific person. It can be modeled after an event or something that somebody said, or things that had happened. So the characters come from all different things versus authors who have said, nope, this character is modeled after this person. And I think that's really a cool thing to remember. When the book came out, the publisher did not think it was going to be a success. Let me read this quote. That her audience would be limited to the women over 40 in the United States. They said that like that was a bad thing. I'm not really sure that that was a bad thing. They tell authors to write about what they know, and that is really something Anne did. She based her town of Abbotsville off of her hometown of Hendersonville, North Carolina, and she based Julia's house off of her own house. These are things which we know. Check the link down below in the description for the links to back this up. But let's go into what the heck was happening in 1998. Well, and why did I pick 1998, not 1999? Well, because very few authors actually published their book write the book in the year that it was published. Usually it comes out the year before. So what was happening in 1998? One big scandal. One of the biggest scandals, of course, was Monica Lewinsky. That actually came out in 1998. And put a pin in that, because you'll see how that reflects later on in this whole review. But also going on in 1998, you have to look at what we had on TV. We had shows like ER, Friends, Diagnosis Murder, Veronica's Closet, so everything wasn't geared just for kids. And that's something to think about when this book, which the publisher didn't think would do well because it was geared towards the over 40 crowd, came out. On a side note, the study that correlated vaccines to autism, that also came out in 1998. Kind of interesting there. Also in 1998, the Catholic priest sex abuse scandal, that was paid off in 1998 for $23.4 million to 9 former altar boys. So let's get into it. Let's start off by talking about the characters. And you're going to see where this ties into what was going on. Our main character is, of course, Julia. Her full name is Julia DeWitt Springer. She is our main character. She is 67 by my calculations. She got married when she was 23, and she'd been married for 44 years. And I will tell you going into this that Miss Julia might be a character that will rub you the wrong way. Because Miss Julia speaks her mind. Or does she? Put a pin in that. We'll come back to that one too. The next character you're going to need to know about is her husband, Wesley Lloyd Springer. We're going to call him WL because that's going to come up later on when you meet another character who is Wesley Lloyd Springer's son. Uh-oh. Yeah, Wesley Lloyd, or WL, had an illegitimate son who is the age of 9 when the book starts. His mother is Hazel Marie Puckett. Hazel Marie is an interesting character. She says in the book that she's from basically the wrong side of the tracks, and her family is shown to cause some problems. However, her brother is also a TV evangelist. Remember how we said we're going to put a pin in that whole Catholic priest scandal? Interesting. Other characters that we have rounding this out are Miss Lillian, who is Julia's housekeeper. And that character caused me some problems in the book. Yeah. And then we also have Sam Murdoch, who is Miss Julia's lawyer. We have Wesley Lloyd, or Little Wesley, and actually they call him Lloyd, because he is the illegitimate son of Miss Julia's husband, and he looks like Miss Julia's husband. So there really is no question about that. Then we have Coleman Bates, who is her boarder at that time, and this is when we start running into problems with just the word boarder. Not renter, boarder. He's renting a room in her house. And I will tell you this right away. As I was reading this book after I got through the first few chapters, I actually had to go back and check and see what time period the book was written in. Because to me, it felt more like the 1950s than it did 1999. And I checked on things to make sure that it was like things were actually what they seemed. Because she does make pop culture references to things like Baywatch, when Coleman needs to, or Bates is what they usually call him, when he needs to get a hold of the sheriff, he must have had a cell phone at that time because he calls the sheriff from the house that they are at. Yeah, so I mean, the time period was right, but some of the things that they didn't seem correct to me. And this is where this becomes important, because I'm bringing my own Midwestern opinions to this and what life was like for me in the 1999 period when I would have been in my 30s. I think so. Yeah, that makes sense. I would have been in my 30s back in 1999, and so my grandmother would have been more that age, but she would have been older. But yeah, Miss Julia had never really written a check before, balanced books, or done any of that stuff because her husband owned the bank, which in my whole world, that was really crazy. I can't imagine anybody owning a bank in 1999, but he did. He owned the bank, so that made them a very wealthy family. And then they also were the family that basically controlled the Presbyterian Church, which was run by the Reverend Larry Ledbetter. Is that right? Yes. Yes. Pastor Larry Ledbetter. Here's the thing about that. Where I grew up, that would not have happened. We did have lots and lots of really, really rich people, but they never controlled the town. So I came at this thinking, well, that seems a little prehistoric. However, the town is supposed to be a really, really small town in North Carolina. So when I look at this, I'm saying, well, to my world, it didn't fit, but in this world, it must fit. So I need to suspend my belief in things and go with, this is the way that the world is. And I'm like, okay, I can do that until it draws me out. And there are little things which draw you out kind of blatantly in this. Actions that halfway through the book, when Miss Julia suddenly becomes, what's the word? She thinks that she's become a nymphomaniac because she gets these funny feelings when this doctor flirts with her. Why? She's 67 years old, and she gets these weird feelings when a doctor flirts with her. I have really some issues with that. I mean, this book has this thing where it has a tendency to characterize certain groups of people in a certain way. In this book, the the religious people, the people of the Presbyterian Church, seem to be a bunch of mean gossips. And I mean actually mean gossips, because it seems like everybody and their brother knew about the affair. It seems like everybody and their brother knew about the child, but nobody told Miss Julia. And part of that is summed up because everybody was afraid about Miss Julia, because Miss Julia had her high morals that she would not hesitate to tell you if you were right or wrong. However, Miss Julia was like, well, those weren't my choices, those weren't my ideas. She was just parroting her husband. And that's really important, where you have a husband who's philandering, and then he's telling everybody about his high morals. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of that. There's lots of that in history leading up to this. You have the Jim and Tammy Baker affair. You had multiple affairs with religious figures, and I think that plays into it, and that's where she got some of her ideas. This is my opinion, where some of these ideas where these religious people were, you know, they seem to not really be all that following the scripture, because Julia did speak about the fact she knew the scripture verses which people were not following. So Miss Julia did know things. She did, you know, she did have her heart in the right place most of the time, but she didn't really like people. And that was one of my problems, is at the beginning, Miss Julia did not seem like a likable character. And what's really interesting about this book is that the first time that I read it, I didn't like Miss Julia. Didn't like her at all. In fact, I thought as I was reading this book, I'm like, one, what time period is this? And two, why am I reading a book about a character who's just mean? And then we have Miss Lillian. Miss Lillian speaks black. I have issues with that. I mean, it's 1998, so should that have even been a thing? Probably not. She is the only African American character in the book, except for her granddaughters, who they don't really mention. The relationship between Miss Julia and Miss Lillian is quite close. I mean, they are more than just employee-employer. They seem to be sort of friends, so Miss Lillian does get to speak her mind and say things that she believes in. So that is a good thing, but I mean, I thought that by that time we would have been past that whole, this is how a minority speaks. However, like I said, I'm coming at this from my perspective and the way that my world was. And in that time, I was living in a college town, so in the Midwest. What's really interesting about Miss Julia and her husband, I don't think that they loved each other. In fact, I think it was more of a business transaction where he marries a respectable woman who would be good for his image, I guess you would say, and she marries somebody because it's about that time. Now, like I said, I mean, I can go on and on about this book because there's lots of things that happen, and I don't want to give this away, but now you're going to probably want to know what my opinion of the book was. I personally, on Goodreads, gave the book a 3-star because while it's an okay book, and I'll tell you this, I might be wrong, because it went on for 22 books. Yes, Miss Julia has 22 different books in it. They just ended, well, she just ended the series in 2021, but I personally didn't care for it because a lot of times there was a lot of, well, just setting up a character to act one way, and then the character completely and totally acts a different way, which there is no explanation for. Sometimes it felt like lots of time had passed because of the way it was written when it was only a few hours. When little Wesley, I don't want to give too much away. Well, no, that I can give away. When little Wesley gets kidnapped, we have Miss Julia and little Wesley, or little Lloyd's mother, Hazel. Hazel needs to be taken care of, and they sort of, you know, let her mend and everything before they go out looking for the child, a 9-year-old who's been kidnapped. But I think I would have done that right away if it were my child. The other thing which is interesting is Miss Lillian is the one who actually rescues the child, but that's a whole interesting little plot point. The characters to me seem very flat. seemed like, they could have had more dimension. They probably did, but it wasn't given it to it because it had so much more of a story to tell. And it was basing, there was a story of the scandal. And the fact that the only thing which really redeemed Miss Julia, in my opinion, was the fact that she was not about to hide little Lloyd, or Wesley, little Lloyd, off from people, because everybody in the church was saying that it's the wife's fault that the man would cheat. It's the wife's fault that he committed these sins. And her opinion was, no, it's not. How can it be her fault for somebody else's actions? And so she had nothing to be ashamed of, so she wasn't going to hide this child away. She was going to parade him around in front of people, which might not have been the best thing, but she wasn't going to hide it, and I thought that was redeemable. And then at the end of the book, even though she does at the beginning of the book call the child a bastard, not in like, he not in that way, more meaning the fact that he was an illegitimate child, she does say that he is a nice person to talk to. Yeah, so that's a thing, but I don't think that Miss Julia had a real character arc, because even though she was mean at the beginning, she's still not the nicest person at the end. So she did have somewhat of a character arc, but she still was really flat. Now, can I say that the plot twists were predictable? Sort of yes, sort of no. The twist at the end, where you realize that Miss Julia might not be as horrible of a person, that one is a nice twist, because she gives a chance to really, really redeem herself, and that's nice to see. However, this still wasn't the book for me, and that might be part of the reason I didn't like it, because as the publisher said, it was a book mainly geared towards women in their 40s, and I was reading this thinking, no, she really doesn't seem that likable. No, I cannot relate to it that much, and so I didn't really relate to it. Will I go back and read the rest of the books? Probably not. But it does have some nice touches about the South. What was really interesting is I was reading comments about the book. Some of the people were vastly upset because she swears one time in the book, and because a couple in the book, Binky, who I haven't mentioned to you guys yet, and Deputy Coleman Bates, they have a relationship. It's not written about in the book. Miss Julia finds them up in Coleman's bedroom in the morning. So people were vastly upset about this, because this is supposed to be a cozy mystery. And a cozy mystery means that there's going to be very little to no sex, very little to no violence. And there's very little to no violence. There's basically no sex, so it is a cozy mystery, and that it did have going for itself. However, people were not having the whole fact that Coleman and Binky, they hooked up. It was scandalous. And that's something we have to think about when you put in the time frame of 1999 to time frame of 2023. 24 years later, people are like, meh. It's not like, older people. I am older people. We're not saying, yay, go for it. Instead, we're sort of saying, okay, we can understand how this could happen, but yeah. It was not very scandalous unless you are looking for some sort of religious, happy thing. And if you were, this is not the book for you. Because like I said, this does not take a really good view of religion. Because all of the things which I've said before. The town is filled with a whole bunch of people who really don't like Miss Julia, don't tell her anything. So yeah, the book in a nutshell, it's a 3. It is a book which is worth reading, sort of. It reads pretty quick, but you're going to feel like you're lost in what time period it is. That's where my thing is. Now, for our next books, we are going to go with coffee shops and bookstores. So we're going to do more than one book because I sort of like that format more. So we're going to do, as of right now, 2 books that I know of, Legends and Lattes and the Bookstore Sisters. Links for those books will be down below. As I come across more books, because I'm reading a lot of books recently, you will see those appear in my, what are these called on YouTube? These will appear as posts to let you know that those will also be included in this. If you want to hear more about the books, or there's a way more in-depth video on my vlog, which is more in-depth about Anne B. Ross and this book, you can check that out on Patreon. The Patreon are channel members. They get more of the in-depth videos and things, and they also get to just help me decide what we're going to do. I'd like to take this time to thank these wonderful people who keep this channel going. Without them, I'd never be able to do this, and I'd never have time enough to read a whole bunch of books. They give me great suggestions, and even though I might not agree with the suggestion, it is a cool suggestion, and I love having that back and forth. And most of the times I do agree with the suggestions because they're really cool people. If you want to become part of that, just hit that button for joining Patreon or becoming a channel member. If not, you can like and share this video, because this lets the YouTube algorithms know that this is a good video and it should get it out amongst the crowd. If you have a book that you'd like to see me read, let me know down in the comments, and I hope I get to see you again the next time you stop by.